Good evening. Welcome to Cranbrook Art Museum. I'm Andrew Blauvelt, the director. So nice to have a live event again and to share the space. It's a really special evening. It's been a really special day. I think this is Allie McGhee Day. You're all over the papers, you're here. We're running out of catalogs, get yours soon. There's a big demand and of course a big interest, which is completely and utterly justified. But this is a part of a series, so we just reinstituted our public programming here at the museum, and I think we have one more event left in our series, which is December 2nd, where I will be in conversation with Kevin Atkinson, who is the curator for the Center for Collections and Research, about A.L. Saarinen and building Cranbrook. I'd also like to welcome our online audience, our live stream audience, who's viewing on all of our lectures are live streamed on YouTube on the DeSalle channel, DeSalle Auditorium channel, and they're also archived there if people give us their permission. So you can look back at other talks we've been doing in this space. So it's always a reference and a resource for you. So without further ado, we're going to have a conversation this evening, and that conversation is between Laura Mott, who is the chief curator at Cranbrook Art Museum, where she has organized many important exhibitions and public art projects, including Nick Cave, Here, In Search of the Truth with Hank Willis Thomas and the Cause Collective, Landlord Colors on Art, Economy, and Materiality, and the related public art program, Material Detroit. Her latest curatorial projects include the Healing Memorial with artist and Academy alumnus Sonia Clark, which debuted earlier this summer at the TCF Center in Detroit. This is a memorial for losses suffered during the pandemic. And of course, sadly, it's continuing struggle. And so we will be adding new contributions, more than I think another 2,000 contributions to that project. So if you're ever down at the Riverwalk, which I am quite frequently, stop in and kind of pay respect to that project and those people. As well as she has organized Olga de Amaral to Weave a Rock with Anna Walker, and that was organized with the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, co-organized with them. That exhibition is also on view, so I'm hopeful this evening, if you hadn't had a chance already to see Allie's exhibition, you have some time this evening. You can come back, of course, to visit, to see the shows upstairs that we just all opened. She is, of course, the curator for Allie McGhee, Banana Moonhorn, which is our long-awaited retrospective of McGhee's prolific 60-year career here in Detroit. Laura will be in conversation, of course, with the artist, Allie McGhee, who is, of course, a pillar of the Detroit art scene, whose signature approach to abstraction can be gleaned in the more than 40 works on view upstairs in our galleries. Allie's work is in numerous public and private collections, including the Detroit Institute of Arts, the St. Louis Museum of Art, and the Morsch Collection, as well as the Studio Museum of Harlem, among many others. His work has been shown in numerous exhibitions, including those taking place at the California African American Museum in Los Angeles, of course, here at Cranbrook Art Museum, even before this show. I think you go back to '72. We discovered that you were here. We was really surprised because unfortunately, we don't have great records for our own projects, but we did surface your name out of our archives, and that was an amazing exhibition with Gallery 7, which is a Black arts collective here in Detroit, back in '72. As well, he's been in exhibitions at the Detroit Institute of Arts, at the Urban Institute for Contemporary Arts over in Grand Rapids, and of course, the University of Michigan, Michigan State University, the Charles H. Wright Museum, the Namdi Gallery, and Hill Gallery. And I would be remiss if I did not also acknowledge the generous support of Harper's in making of the companion catalog, Banana Moonhorn, for the exhibition. And as I said, we're kind of running out quickly, so if you're interested, I would grab one tonight. So please help me welcome to the stage Laura Mott and Allie McGhee. Oh. I joke. they're not really coming up the second because they wanted you to watch a video that we made to help introduce Allie. So if we could roll the video and then they will come up on stage. Sorry about that.
Every day but Christmas, like after all the years you spent doing this, I mean, you're a lost soul. So you get up in the morning and you read the paper or something, and, well, yeah, go to the studio. Then you stay until the light starts passing around the side of the building. And I usually end up making a lot of passes before I go home. So that way I know they're cooking while I'm gone. The exciting aspect of painting for me is the combination of cubism and like biomorphic, God-made elements and man-made elements. And so in my work now, it's still very much a contest between biomorphic or God-made kinds of energies and man-made. That takes place on every one of my canvases, and it brings a lot of excitement to me. That was sort of like the springboard, do different things with the figure. And one thing led to another, and more input about ideas and less about subject matter. That's when I really started to work in what you might call abstract expression. It gives you the opportunity to allow the work to set direction for you during the process. And I like that idea because so much happens during the process. That's where the excitement is. And so if you don't have the opportunity to do something that you hadn't planned on doing from the very beginning, I think you're missing the boat. And this one here is called The Big Bang, and it's showing the history of like pyramid building, grids, mathematics, and of course voodoo, magic, and cave paintings. It's sort of timeless, it captures some of the attempts of man to explain the unknown. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. Let's see, about 3.5 months or so. Yeah, it's been a while because some days, I don't work on that one at all. I work on these because they lend experiences which can be transmitted to this piece. And like I said, you don't want to, whip a pony till it dies. You just ride it while you can and give it an opportunity to rest. And at the same time, you're learning something that's related when you do these other pieces. I like to work on several paintings simultaneously for several reasons. One is that you cannot force a good painting. What you will end up with is a forced painting. So by having 4 or 5 paintings that you're working on at the same time, you get to a point where you find yourself getting precious with the work, or you're not forging ahead. You just set it aside and work on another. Plus, sometimes what you discover in a new painting can lend itself to solving problems you're having in a previous one. The experiences that I have had on this planet are mainly concerned with what we call the blue planet, the water, the sky, and the earth, the trees, and so forth. So I stay kind of close to that when I'm probing my palette, something that I know very well. Why would I go someplace that I haven't been previously? To me, it's a very exciting experience because you develop a language through your experiences. I often look at my stuff in the studio when you have 4 or 5 paintings on the wall in front of you. And when you push them closer together, it looks like one long painting, like what you did on one leads to what you're doing on another, and so forth and so on. And I'm looking forward to having that long look from not just painting to painting, but decade to decade. Like, how did he get from stuff in the 60s to understanding and utilizing that information in the 70s and the 80s and 90s? And surely, like other things in life, you know, we slowly move away from our childhood fantasies, but we keep some of that with us. It gives you more understanding and respect too, to evolution, like how life began on this planet and how it multiplied, you know, and extrapolated into all these varieties, but they're all based on the same kind of concept. It makes you feel like you're a part of something much larger than your daily life. And so I'm looking forward to having that long read on my career.
Testing, testing.
It's working.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out on this dark, stormy night. Allie and I are going to do what we do best, which is talk. We've been spending years talking in the studio, and now you all get to be flies on the wall for what we talk about, sometimes for hours. So this is easy for us because we love to do this together. Can I bring the slides up, please? Perfect. So we just saw a film of Allie in his studio. That's been one of your constants throughout your life. And I'm actually going to ask a very Taylor Aldrich question. She's another one of the writers for the book and a very close friend of Allie's. And she always likes to kind of go back to the biographical information of the roots of someone's beginnings and the relationship with their family. And I thought that would be a really great place to start, because you told me some really great stories about being a child and creating in your mother's kitchen and in her basement.
Yes, people ask me the question a lot historically about when did you start painting, or when did you know you wanted to be an artist?
A little closer.
And I was maybe 5 or 7 years old, just a little toddler, a little bit beyond toddling, and I would consider myself a muralist because I would take my crayons and move throughout the house, drawing on the walls and refrigerator and anything that I could reach with my height. And there were some critics that didn't appreciate the quality of my work, but my mom, who had been a supporter of mine all my life, told them, like, hey, you know, he might be onto something, you know, let him express himself. And so from that point on, and up until now, I've been doing similar exercise on a daily basis, drawing on all kinds of materials and using all kinds of paint and developing tools that I did not use in the early days, where I was pretty much, you know, easel and oil paints. But I found later that, you know, discovery was the real part and the opportunity to be creative. So I quickly started gravitating to all multi-materials and surfaces, which kind of goes back to the kitchen cabinets again, you know.
And your first, you name your first studio as being as your mother's basement when you're like 10 years old.
Yes, a friend of mine who's in New York, an artist as well, Maceo Mitchell, him and I, we were like 10 years old, and we had decided already that we were going to grow up and become artists. And we had our favorite artists. Mine was like Brock and Picasso, because I love Cubism. And can you imagine that 10-year-old kid instead of having hot dogs? But, and Maceo, his was Degas. He loved the ballet dancers. So we were in my mom's basement with our so-called studio and this little cheap portable record player playing Tchaikovsky and being artists. And so it stuck, you know, and it's like now it's about 70 years later, and we're still doing that very thing.
Yeah, there was, and you continued on to make work as a teenager at Cass Tech, and they had an article about yourself and a few other artists when you were a teenager, and the title was "Someday You'll Know My Name."
Yes, there was an article appeared in Michigan Chronicle, and we were in high school, and it was Ibn Pori, Pitts, Lester Johnson, and myself, and they interviewed us and asked us typical questions for a high schooler, like, what were you going to do, you know, when you become an adult? And we all answered with that same, we're going to be an artist. Most people don't take that seriously. Like when you ask a child, they say, I'm going to be a cowboy or a fireman or a rocket scientist or something, but we were dead serious. And all three of us participated in that pursuit right up until today.
So one of the first works I want to talk about is one that's very dear to me, Ku Klux Klan. I showed this in the exhibition Landlord Colors, and it's actually in the exact same spot in your retrospective on the same show, on the same gallery. But this is a piece I remember seeing on the wall of your studio. First of all, when I've been to Allie Studio for many times over the last few years, but I remember my first experience in seeing petrified bananas, like just located sporadically. There's one on top of an intercom, and I was like, oh, we're gonna get along great.
Yeah.
Like, and I wanted to kind of, you told me the story of this work in 1969, and part of it was part of a larger narrative of your shift from figurative works to abstraction. So I thought it'd be great to kind of talk about this work, and then maybe shift into the larger conversation about how you found abstraction.
Yeah, well, this particular piece had a long history, and it actually resulted in the name of this particular exhibition. I was at Northern High School, Charles McGhee and myself, doing a large mural. I did it's about 40 by 60 feet, and it was used as a teaching tool for the students, so they could watch you actually paint on this mural and be free to ask questions about, as it progressed, you know, what are you doing, what does it mean, et cetera, et cetera. And you have a lot of critiques in your life as an artist, but most of them don't use four-letter words to describe what you're doing. But the youngsters, this is their favorite way of communicating. And so while I was working on the mural, a young man came up to me and he asked me, what the hell is this? And I tried to explain to him how the history came about. In the 60s, I was collecting a lot of African art, and many of the masks had horned animals, and that was one of the things that I was really strongly attracted to, was the sculpture, the cubism, and these horns. So it progressed from that to a period of time when I did some more romantic themes like Moonlight Sonata and other things involving the moon. And the whole attraction for me was I went back to studying cave paintings because I wanted to gain access to some of the first mark making that we had experienced as human beings, so that I could start there and incorporate that kind of information in my work. So the young man, he said, yeah, well, that's all fine and true, but it looks like a banana to me. Well, I thought, that's fine, because what I wanted to do was communicate with the personal history of the viewer, not what I was trying to explain to him, but what did he know about the symbols and the forms and the shapes that I was using. And so the name of the particular crescent shape, which originated from the cave drawings, became the banana moon horn. So that each name that he used and I used and where it originally came from was added on to the story. And that's where I look at the works now, that there are some familiar shapes that we all know, triangle, circle, square, rectangle, and so forth. But what each individual brings to that form is very special to them, and it's more personal than I could possibly be. So this way I get to reach out to each one who looks at a painting and give you some idea where you might want to go in terms of enjoying the work.
And so for the story about Ku Klux Klan in particular, you were talking about you were walking around the city of Detroit. I mean, this is a time in the city, a couple of years after the '67 rebellion, and kind of set the tone, I think, for some of your interest in abstraction.
Yeah, I was an avid runner. Now I'm just a sometimes runner. But when I was out going for a run, I came upon this. Actually, what it really is, it's a decorating cone, if everybody knows what that is, where you put the decoration and the pastries and you decorate cakes and so forth. And so I stopped and I picked it up because to me, with the heightened racial disturbance that we were just involved in, it reminded me of Ku Klux Klan hat. And if you look at my work over a period of time, you see that satire is a big part of the fun that I have with subject matter. And so I quickly took that back to the studio and painted on that surface. And I named it the Ku Klux Clown hat because I thought that the whole idea was pretty damn silly. And so I should poke fun at it rather than take it as a serious threat.
And you had to add a banana. So this idea of the banana moon horn it's a reoccurring shape that you see throughout Allie's body of work. And a lot of times you have an origin story for your lexicon of symbols, but they start to become more and more abstracted over time. Another example of that is the Ubangi figure. This also kind of links to your interest in African art as a resource for your symbolism and visual language.
Yeah, when we think about that 10-year-old in the basement and already attracted to Cubism from looking at the constant surveillance from various critics and artists and history books, that it's a very powerful way of describing the figure. And you're subject to the most important aspects of it rather than the ones that we look at ourselves as a reflection of ourselves. And I wanted to move away from that, considering us the center of the universe than just being a part of it. And that gave me more freedom to express myself because I didn't have to adhere to what I've been taught all my life as a student of art. And
for a great deal of time, my favorite artists were Michelangelo and Raphael, which was very classic and beautiful line drawings, beautiful renderings, and I was really struck by that and thought that I had reached the place that I wanted to be. Then one of my instructors at Eastern Michigan called me in the office and said, "Allie, your drawings are beautiful, but we already have Raphael and Michelangelo, you know, so what are you going to bring to the table?" And he introduced me to a Mexican-American artist called Rico LeBrun, and beautiful line quality, beautiful rendering, but he would push the charcoal around the page to cause additional excitement rather than just a pictorial rendering of the human figure. That got me. When I saw that, I said, hey, there's lots of places to go than where I've been so far.
And so the Ubangi figure itself, you have a series of works. We have a few examples upstairs, but it's something that reoccurs in your work. Can you talk a little bit about the Ubangi figure, where it comes from, and what drew you to it?
Yeah, it's another case of history. As a young child, there are things that impress upon you during that period of your life that you carry with you all your life. And this Ubangi series had 2 or 3 different kinds of input. One was Ibn, Pori, and I were at CAS in the art department, and that was a rarity in itself for a person of color to be at CAS pursuing art. And so we sort of like had a bond of brothers. And so I, again, with the satire, I thought, like, why not, you know, the Ubangi brothers? Because there was a scornful way that this Ubangi was a description of what you were if you were black in America. We had this African derogatory way of looking at the African art, and the Ubangi was something to be laughed at and taunted rather than a serious threat. So naturally, I would pick this up and say, I can change this to being another way of looking at the great art that comes out of the cubism of African sculpture. And the other part of it was that blackface. And when I was a young man, there used to be a traveling blackface troupe called Salis Green. Probably nobody here has heard of that because it was something that only took place in the South, and where this black troupe would blacken their faces and wear big yellow lips and do entertaining in tents, and they would travel all over the South doing these shows. And so, like, it was like eye-opening for me. I'd never seen anything like that. And I remembered it, though. And so when I started doing these sort of head studies of African art, I kind of gravitated to the Ubangi as being a vehicle for me to express this kind of anti-respect for African art.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so the Ubangi figure is, well, it's a river and a location, but it's also the name for when you would look at, you know, I don't know, National Geographic, and you would see like a woman from Chad who has distended lips with the wooden disc. That's what it's referencing, and so using that as kind of a visual language to break down. A good example is this piece behind me, which is Ubangi News from 1984, and which you kind of, you know, already like. Someday you'll know my name, right? Like you putting yourself already into art history by using the cover of Art News to make Ubangi News.
Yes, very much. I enjoy
Pick it up. They're not going to hear you at home.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I enjoy that because it was a kind of reflection of the whole history and of the now that I would turn it upside down and put the Ubangi mask all superimposed over the art news. And it was in my studio, and when Laura came, she noticed it, but I would get a kick out of it, and I passed it every day. This is something that changes things.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that upstairs in the retrospective is almost some things that are very formal paintings and some things that were just living on the studio walls for decades sometimes that
Yes.
were then kind of extracted and framed. But because I thought they tell such an interesting story about Allie, and I think even it's evident when in the video we showed, there's such a fluidity between like his influences and found objects and what kind of lands on the canvas. So that's one of the reasons why we exhibited the way we did. There's another amazing work from 1984 upstairs called Apartheid. I would want you to talk a little bit more about abstraction in particular. When you talk about your process involving movement, speed, intuition, I'd love to hear more about why abstraction felt like the right fit for you when you started to lean into it.
Well, like you just mentioned, it has a direct reflection on science and art. In fact, there's a project that we did for about 3 years with University of Michigan and artists where you would go to a research scientist lab and see what kinds of things they were doing, and they would come to your studio to look at the art and what you were doing. And it was unbelievable because they would come to my studio, view the drawings and paintings, and they had already descriptive analogies and mention of things that was in their field of investigation by looking at what I was doing as a painter. And the same thing happened to me. Like when I would visit the lab, they had microscopes that were maybe $10 million in expense to have. And I could look through there, and what it looked like was like a Kandinsky or a Moreau or some other artwork. And it just showed how closely related the reality and abstract are. You know, I don't think there's a difference. Everything is abstract to us because we don't know enough to have the kind of surefire explanation of what goes on around us. We make stabs and estimates that will hold true for a period of time until we find or get more information. And similar to what I do, when I started the painting, I'm looking for information that I have and information that occurs during the process. And that's when the ideas begin to get more abstract because the process became more important than the subject matter. And what the color and the materials and shapes would do dictated what I would do in relationship to that.
Yeah, actually, I think this is a great example of where the relationship between reality and abstraction comes together in a really profound way. The title of this work is Apartheid, and it's in no means a realistic depiction, but you feel the chaos, you feel the movement through the use of abstraction with this work. It's another example of your use of titles as a way of guidance for the viewer.
Yes. I think that, you just want to suggest so that you have a compass, but I'm not going to be your guide. I would rather be traveling through the work with you. And the apartheid piece, you can see some of the application of the paint suggests different things to you, like repetition, speed, light. These kinds of things are what we have in places of our recall that can be stimulated when you see work by the color, which we all know has deep psychological impact, and by the marks that are made, repetitive and fast. And so we can kind of suggest emotion, you know, with these kinds of observations and depicting them on the surface.
So, you know, abstraction really becomes your primary language that you work with as an artist. You've talked about some of the artists that influenced you locally, and there may be some more that you want to mention. So I'm interested in what other artists you've been in dialogue with throughout your career, whether that be, you know, ongoing conversations in the studio for decades, or artists you have a kinship with in art history.
Yeah, well,
talk
there
into
were
that.
there were artists that I knew from New York or Detroit that were good friends of mine, like Al Loving and Ed Clark, and I was attracted to their approach to making art. Like Ed is famous for his push broom, and where I use a stick to move paint, because movement and physical activity was an important component, you know, for both he and I. And you talk about information that can be gathered by looking at how the work was done. I think that these two guys were monumental in that way. And then there were other artists, of course, that were famous that you were introduced to in art history classes and so forth, like Helen Frankenthaler and Kandinsky, Pollock. You know, each one of these artists brought something kind of different in the way they executed the works. And that offered us, or offered me, the freedom to explore more ways of applying paint, surfaces to work on, and even changing the look of canvas like Ed did with the shape canvas about 1950 or something, or like Al did when he started using cloth, shredded cloth, instead of what he was famed for was hard edge cube. So knowing artists and seeing their work has an influence into such a wide range of ways to approach it. And the other thing is that as a young artist, you think you're breaking new ground, you're really getting someplace, and then you get introduced to a guy who's been doing that for 50 years. But it makes you feel comfortable that there's logic, investigation, exploration that is timely and fruitful, and so you appreciate that, and then you try to move on along to someplace else that maybe is not occupied.
I remember when we were talking about Frankenthaler, and I said, well, what draws you to her work? And you said, well, she chases light around like I chase light around.
Right, exactly. And the other thing that I loved about her is what she said about painting is a process that you seek answers to. You don't know them. If you know the conclusion of a painting, why would there be any reason to do it? You know, it's the exploration that brings the good result.
So I want to start talking about how your practice evolved and started to include dimensionality of the canvas itself. Can you talk a little bit about what led to that? What was the turning point?
Yeah, first I want to tell another story.
All right.
When I was young, and I was an only child, so I spent all of my time entertaining myself by drawing. And I had a bit of a temper, and when things didn't go the way I expected them, I would attack the artwork by balling it up, putting it on the floor, stomping it and showing my displeasure. And my mom would come along and say, hey, why are you destroying that work of art? And I said, because it's terrible, it's ugly. And she said, no, you know, and she would take it and spread the wrinkles out and put it over on the table or even put it on the wall. And I would look at it in disgust, but I said everyone has their way. And the kind of thing that I'm doing now, which I call crushed paintings, which is a three-dimensional painting, and I don't consider it to be sculptural because I'm a painter, but it has some of the same creative basis that destroying the paintings when I was younger had, only I do it in a different way and not so violent either, and I lay them on the floor and I paint on both sides. And one side is usually kind of passive, gives me an opportunity to work in that kind of palette and that kind of rhythm and that kind of application. The other side is more passive. So I have a passive and an aggressive side, and then I can put those two together and create excitement in ways that I couldn't do with a two-dimensional piece because you overpaint and that's it. You can't go back and get that again like you can with the folding and the bending. And the other aspect of it was that the two-dimensional works, which I've done for 40 or 50 years, you're looking at them as an illusion. I'm creating a feeling of three-dimension, even from the time of doing still life and figurative work to doing abstract work. And now I wanted to actually have the combination of the third dimension and the two-dimension working together, which allows a person to look at the original works or the 2D works in a different way, because you are invited to look around and behind and into areas of color and shape. Instead of just reading it left to right, you're reading it left to right and in and out. And that was exciting for me, and found it to be exciting also for some of my patrons. Made me wonder if perhaps they were getting bored with those two-dimensional things. But it was another way of speaking, I might say, about your work, another introduction to potential adventure for the viewer.
Yeah, I mean, the crushed paintings are, well, first of all, just really stunning. But again, I think there's something, when you and I talk about, going back to some of our early ideas about, you were talking about the cosmos and talking about, you know, the larger scale of a viewpoint of the world. And your titles, I find often speak to, especially with the crushed paintings, speak to moments of action, illumination, or transformation. Can you kind of speak a little bit about that and your relationship to the natural world, which I know is very important to your practice?
I, as you know, I'm a big fan of the cosmos and the potential and possibilities that it offers us in observing what goes on in the universe and what goes on here. Like the same kind of nucleus of microscopic things that we learn by looking through microscopes takes place in the cosmos with telescopes. And so we hadn't had that point of view until the development of some of the technology that we have now, so that we can see these truths that are amazing, more amazing than what we thought they might be, that the reality of the cosmos and our lives are like related in many ways, but we don't have the time to contemplate what goes on beyond our lifespan. Like we consider 87.35 or whatever it is being the Bible to all knowledge. But look how small that is. Like you're eliminating a planet that is, I think, 3.5 million years old, and the changes on them occur at a pace that we don't recognize or paying attention to. Like these catastrophes that we're having, they're saying it's chaos. Well, it might appear that way to us because we have a particular way we want to look at the universe. But what happens is this might be occurring every 50,000 years or every 100,000 years on a regular timetable, but we have no way of knowing. And I like probing with painting as a way that reveals some of the same truths that we see in the cosmos. You're working with the same kinds of elements, like we were talking about light, speed, and things of that nature, which are universal. And it's great to be able to go into your studio and toy with these mind-boggling theories while you're painting.
I mean, I think that's something too where we go into Allie's studio and it's surrounded by, there's lots of books on art history, African art, the elegant universe, the cosmos. I mean, there's a lot of research that goes into your thinking and your practice. Also extends to music and jazz and this other kind of ways in which, you know, I love that quote that you say, the more you learn you don't know. And this kind of pursuit of that inquiry is so much of what you do in a daily practice in your studio.
Yes. You know, it's like a laboratory in a sense, you know, and after having that, I think it was 3 years of University of Michigan using art and science as a way of explaining the kinship that they share, that it's an exciting time for us because we are just beginning to probe the cosmos, and it reveals more about us now here than what we previously considered. It was playful, you know, our regard for the cosmos, because it wasn't something tangible to us. But now it's been revealed to be more tangible, and it affects our daily lives. Though some of us refuse to accept science, those of us who do are given many reasons for applauding our effort, you know, to find out more about the cosmos. We find out more about ourselves. And the cellular structure is so akin to the kinds of things that we see in the cosmos. And for me, it's been delightful because, you know, Tuesday is Science Day in the New York Times, and they always have something, some significant discovery. Well, more times than I can mention, I have seen photographs from the Hubble telescope or some other newly photographed phenomena in the universe, and I have that in a painting done 10 years ago. And I'm saying, like, you guys are just getting there, you know, like, you want to speed it up a bit. You know, it's like the Dogon who described, you know, the solar system long before there was Galileo and a telescope. So how do we know these things? And I think the answers are, you know, come from within. You know, as we all know that we
And
don't,
aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about aliens a lot.
Yeah, we do. Is that, you know, that there's so much of our brain, we all know that we don't use. And so, like, if we were able to, you know, utilize all of the knowledge that we possibly could have, we would be a lot further along. But that's a whole nother exhibition.
And so finally, then we'll open up for questions from the audience. You know, the last painting was actually called The Long Look, and at the end of the video, you said it'll be interesting for you to see not painting to painting, but also decade to decade. I'm curious to know, what has that been like for you to see the retrospective come together and be reflective back on decades?
I haven't been able
You
to
gotta
see
talk into
I haven't been able to see it because every time I come out, people are like, hey, it's the guy, you know. But it's been very fulfilling because I've had many exhibitions and they're all current, you know, current paintings, current works, so forth, so on. And so it's like somebody coming in on an epic film like Ben-Hur or something in the last 5 minutes. You know nothing. So your enjoyment level is just as low as the information that you receive. But when you see things from the beginning, you have a better awareness of what was going on then and what happened after that and what's happening now. And the other thing that I find fulfilling is that the measure of an artist is to how well did you accomplish what you set out to do. And that entails where you started in the continuity of the evolution of your work throughout year after year. And so when you can look at the evolution of your work and it has a development continuity, you feel very good about what you acquired, how you utilize it, and where you can go with it. It's important to be able to give a person the confidence that you have made that journey successfully. And so for me to come in and see things like that portrait of me and line drawing and to go from that to this is a big step. But if you're able to do it like Laura has done, pick out points along the way, it's a smooth transition for you to see like where I was and why I took this particular path, and this is where we are now. And it's something that's based on making decisions every 30 seconds, because when you're painting, every second you're making decisions about color and texture and line and all these things, and to have them be developed in a reasonable way over years and years is a very good feeling for me when I get an opportunity to see the whole show. But I've run through it several times, and of course when you put it up, I had a good look at it, and I was a little emotional, you might say, at seeing, looking over your shoulder, you know, and knowing too all the things that happen on the way from childhood to being a teenager and a young artist who you thought you were going to set the world on fire, and you go from being a young giant to being an old man or old master. would be better, you know.
That was wonderful. I want to open it up, the question to the audience. I'm going to ask, maybe someone to move the microphone around, do you mind? Any questions?
Yeah, pick the furthest place to go.
You've been doing this for so long, and you were just talking about this consistency from where you started to where you are now. Were there any detours or times where you took a break or, you know, took a hard left or whatever? And what happened in those times? And had they contributed to when you came back?
I don't I didn't quite hear that clearly. Would you give?
I can repeat the, ooh,
Yeah.
hot mic.
Yeah.
I can repeat the question. He was
Okay.
saying that you were talking about continuity, but have there been times in your life where there were detours, or you took a break, or a hard left?
Well, I don't know if I would describe it as a detour. It might be more attuned to a pause over a period of time while you search yourself and the direction you're going, and to survey that and see if this is what you really do, want to do. There have been times when I had tried varied techniques that would end up, like, for example, when I was looking at African textiles, I was really attracted to the stitching and the patterns. And I did a series of paintings which were, I guess you would have to call it pointillism. And I found that, like, that's really not me, you know, like, I don't look at life as dot, dot, dot. I look at it as more crescendos and kabooms and excitement and things of that nature, you know, big passages. And so the dot, dot, dot thing I had to abandon after about a year of driving myself insane trying to make those little dots. But I learned a lot about color field. And so you try to take something away from every experience that's positive.
I was wondering, have you done a lot of traveling in your life around the world? And if so, how has that influenced your work?
Well, you know, one of the things that I wanted to do when I went back to researching some of the early markings on caves was techniques that were used, you know, all over the world by varied artists, sand painting, almost everything that you can consider were done in different parts of the world. Like, art was being made everywhere, not just in Europe. And so the techniques and approaches that they used gave you ammunition, I might say, to probe other ways of working yourself. And like, for example, the crushed paintings, I just recently visited Japan, and I got kind of, went to an exhibit of origami. Whew. I mean, it's not the kind of thing we talk about making a bird or something like that. It's awesome. It's like paper sculpture, which I came back and did something similar with what you might call paper sculpture, but I call it painting, and not as elegant as the origami, a little more forceful in making shapes and forms. So I think that, you know, being exposed to all the kinds of art makers and materials they use to make art can do nothing but help you express yourself.
Test. You know, years ago, there was a time when a lot of people were talking about the relationship between abstract expressionism and jazz, and this kind of thing about improvisation. And you talked earlier about, you know, letting yourself become sort of involved in a process where there's a lot of things that might change during that process. Yes. And it kind of starts that I'm thinking back about how that they talked about, you know, the metaphysical aspects And in a sense, you were talking about this with your relationship with the cosmos, that, something, like maybe musicians used to become vehicles for some type of information, and perhaps artists, particularly abstract expressionist artists, might become a vehicle for some type of information. I wondered if you were around and heard that conversation much.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, my favorite jazz artists are, and when I give you those names, you will realize, what you were saying is right on, is Thelonious Monk, John Coltrane, Miles Davis. These guys came through at a time, say in the 60s, where improvisation was the mainstay of exploration of new music. And I feel that very much akin to that. And it also gave, creativity across the board, an idea that you don't have to play it like John Philip Sousa did. You can alter that. You can go places where you haven't been before, and you can take the audience with them by using the same things that I use, like repetition, because you hear the same beat, or whether it's the rhythm section, they will carry you over the places of improvisation that you might not understand and bring you into an alignment to enjoy a new experience and not the one you've been hearing from John Philip Sousa. So, in fact, I used to play the saxophone, but I was not good at it. And I had to put it down and pick up the charcoal. But the idea that improvisation it's a leader in the way of thinking. And like you would go to a set and hear these guys playing, and you could feel the communication between these solos, that they were stretching the music to a new place. And I feel very much akin to that in doing art, that you're reaching and stretching for new information, and you want to go someplace that you didn't go yesterday, and that's where I think the excitement is in creativity, whether it's writing or music or visual or painting.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, this is Nanette. Nanette Carter is here to see you from New York. Yes, drawing a blank. Micro Dream, this huge canvas, and you call it Micro Dream. Can you talk a bit about scale? Because you work small, and then you work extremely large. Can you talk about the different energies that are used in these, how scale plays a very key role in what you're doing when you're creating?
Did you hear that?
Yeah, so
What's wrong with my ears? I can't hear.
I think it's the mask that muffles it a little bit.
Oh, okay.
So what she was asking about was scale. Micro Dream in particular, this piece that you usually work kind of small, but you also have been getting quite larger, and the different energies between working on different scales.
Yeah, maybe 15, 20 years ago, the average size that I worked with maybe was 2 to 3 feet. Then it became 4 and 5 feet, and now it's 8, 10, and this one's 24. And one of the things that you're looking at a piece of art, it can be a miniature and it's real small, and I find it's more difficult for me to get in that little world than it is for me to enjoy being dominated by a huge piece, a place that you can find yourself in over and over again became appealing to me. And so my scale started changing to 6 and 8 and 10 feet, where you could stand in front of a painting and you would have to look left, right, up and down the work as you investigate it instead of focusing on it right before your eyes. Or I compare that to TV. Of course, TV now is 6 feet, but like when I was coming up, it was like 12, 14 inches. You had a big TV. So it takes you out of that reference and puts you into another reference in your size, you're contemplating, and the piece that you're, looking at. And needless to say that some of the things in the Sistine Chapel or the cathedrals, they have these huge murals all over the ceilings and walls. They're breathtaking, and that's one of the reasons too. It's like, wow, instead of just looking at it like a stamp collector.
You mentioned Lester Johnson and Charles McGhee and a couple others that at a very young age, y'all felt this is our career, this is our trajectory. And, you manifested that. What role would you say, or how big of a role having these colleagues, as youngsters, do you think it played in having this long of a career?
Lester, Charles, and there was 7 of us in the Gallery 7. It was founded by Charles on McNichols near Mary Grove College. And it was something that we needed because during that time, there were no galleries that showed any black artists. And so Charles decided he would open up his own gallery. And at this point, I think that Lester and I are the only 2 survivors of that gallery. And it was a very powerful experience because the kinds of work that were shown there, much of it was abstract, which was something that you didn't see coming out of the black creative community. Most of it was pictorial. So we were bucking all kinds of things, as you frequently do when you don't know the extent of the problem. But we were determined on allowing artists to paint what subject they wanted to, and it was quite successful because people enjoyed seeing the variety of approaches to making art. And we were younger then, of course, and brash, and considered that as being one of the things that we should be doing. And so we did. And the experience there was great too because we took kids and we had classes on Saturday where we would give the students the full possibility of stretching your canvas, sizing your canvas, and painting and have an exhibition. So like I said, this is the kinds of things that you'll have to learn to do if you want to be an artist. And most important was that they could see an adult male black artist, because then you don't think this is a possibility for a youngster to have an example of someone who has had success at something that's very difficult. In fact, when it's time for another story. When I was going to college, my mother's friends would come by, visit, and say, "Oh, where's your son?" He's away at college. "Oh, that's great. What's he studying? Astrophysicist, a doctor, brain surgeon, art. Art? There's no future for him in art. Why would you waste hard-earned money on a college education for someone to be an artist?" And so that was the general consensus, you know, during that period, that that was not obtainable by anyone, especially someone of color, you know.
Any other questions?
We wiped them all out.
I know. Well, I have to say, and I want to say thank you. This has been an honor and like pure joy to write about your work and to make this show with you.
Well, thank you, Laura. Thank you.